Hello, everyone, and welcome to the another English One podcast. Today, my guest is pretty known on this channel, John Jewett. Welcome.
Hello, Dawid. Thanks for having me again. I'm glad I'm known on the channel, and yeah, just excited to chat on this. It's a lot has happened since the last time we had a conversation.
Yeah, I still get those questions from the guys outside of my country that they are watched the podcast with you, and they are pretty amazed about me not being agreed with you
Oh,
because that's supposedly are not common because most of the guys just agree with the guest because it's polite. And I'm not want to sound like I am not polite because I am. But
no, you are polite. You are
yeah,
polite, but
yeah,
it's good to have it makes better conversation for sure.
yeah, especially that I don't believe in a good and a bad way of doing something in bodybuilding. Of course, if you are not doing silly stuffs, but most of the things is actually pretty, I think, like a person dependent. So no matter what you are doing, if it works, it's probably good. Yeah, so this is like a not negotiable. But today I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your current and your past approach to the bodybuilding as a whole, but in terms of your person, because you have like I don't know how long you are actually competing. It's gonna be quite a long
12
time.
years.
12 years. Oh my God. It's more than I've even trained. I train like a almost 12. This year is gonna be
Oh
12, but
man.
yeah.
Yeah, I just turned 38, so I'm like, gosh, I feel old in it, but I realized, well, oh, Andrew Jack is like, what is he, 39 or 40? And I was
Yeah.
like, John De La Rosa's, 40. I'm like, I'm okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
when I was 26.
Yeah, great. So, the first topic I wanted to ask you is about your beginnings because everyone starts somewhere. So, I've never actually asked you about this, and that's probably the topic that we should start with because if we both knows that there's some kind of guys uh, like a genetic freaks that they are almost look like they train even though they never put their foots on a gym floor, and those guys were mostly skinny or skinny fat or just fat. So which one you are?
I was definitely I was smaller, but I was relatively fairly lean, but I wasn't that extremely lean individual, but not overly muscular either. I've kind of like always had like big abs and biceps like in my younger age like in earlier school everyone would be like flex your bicep John, right, or your abs, because that was like standout, and I just like remember that. So I wasn't definitely like, I remember kids in school that were like big framed and pretty stocky with a lot of muscle. Like that wasn't me because I was a smaller framed. um but I would say above average on like muscularity and like my body fat levels. But I played sports since I was like just a kid, like 5, 6 years old, going all the way. So training started really, really early for me. I started lifting when I was in sixth grade.
Did you grow up on a farm or in a city? Because I've tend to notice that those guys who are work their whole life on a farm and doing like a manual stuffs, they always are kind of bulky.
Yeah, you call them farm strong, right?
Yeah, something like that.
No, I grew up in the city.
Okay.
But early on, I moved out to the country when I was 8 years old, but it wasn't like a farm or anything. So definitely like city life.
Oh, okay, okay. So, do you remember where do you actually find out about the bodybuilding for the first time? So, for example, that you realize that you can pick up some heavy stuff from the ground and actually make a change to your body like that.
Yeah, first exposure, I was 6 years old. My next door neighbor, he loved bodybuilding. He had stacks of bodybuilding magazines, and realized like I was born in '86, so I came to the era of like Arnold, Stallone, all this
Yeah.
muscle was like everywhere. So seeing those magazines, he was like first exposure to like lifting and bodybuilding. And he took me to the gym when I was 6. I think I just did curls the whole time while he trained. I was so sore. Like I think I was sore for like a week. But I was just fascinated with it. So I would do push-ups and sit-ups even like really young age. So that was like kind of first exposure to being like really interested in it always. But then like sixth grade, like 12, 13 is when I was like, all right, I really want to like change my physique. And it's probably more about trying to impress your friends and
Yeah.
get girls and stuff at that age. But
That's never happened. The part with the girls never happened. So, do you remember how's your first ever diet look like?
oh gosh, the first like structured diet I had, because at throughout high school I was always trying to the guy gaining weight and like adding in calories. I
But
never had a lot of
did
structure
you
to it.
sorry that I interrupt you, but did you get the where did you get the concept of the calories? Because I remember that when I was starting, I didn't real I don't realize that everything has calories. I just thought that food is food and you have to eat big to get big and stuff like that. Never even think about the calories at the beginning.
Man, I was always been like a nerd with like, trying to read and learn because it just wasn't a lot of information out. So that same neighbor that I grew up with, like I went back and talked to him when I was in sixth grade, and he gave me my first weight set as well. And he gave me a book, a nutrition book. He's like, read this and follow it. And it talked about those things in there, like calories and protein and carbs. So it didn't really resonate like to make a diet, but I just knew I needed to like eat more. And then like I had a protein powder supplement when I was in seventh grade. That was horrible. I ended up returning it to the store because it was so bad. And but then by eighth grade, it was like I wanted to get on creatine. That's when everyone was like, creatine's like a steroid, and like I wasn't allowed to have it for a long time. And finally, like my mom and dad were like, okay, you can have your creatine. So even early on, that was like, what do I take, not what do I do, you know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it wasn't till like high school is when like I spoke with some guys. We had a GNC by us, and I'd go in there a lot. And when the manager was like, "Man, you need more calories. Like, here's this. You need this weight gainer shake." So I was on a Cyto gainer, but by Cytosport, and so I'd have that. So that was like my first like calorie increase. Then I would just eat whatever my mom had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but eat just a lot of it. So I didn't really have a diet set up, but I was just trying to eat a lot, and I had this weight gainer shake that I'd have like morning and night as well. Um, so I didn't have a structured diet till I was a senior in high school, and I met this guy that he bodybuild. He also did like MMA fighting, and he gave me a diet. I think he just gave me his diet. It was ridiculous. It was like 500 grams of protein. It was like 12 ounces of meat 6 times per day, and I could barely finish any of it. It was just, and I also was waiting tables at a restaurant, so I was be in the back trying to like eat this huge thing of like meat and sweet potato that was just cold, and it was impossible to follow. So I ended up kind of falling off of that.
Do you have any period of your life that when you're using some sort of if you feed your macros, but not that like you're doing right now? Because right now you do kind of eat feed your macros, but like a
Oh
smarter way
yeah,
of it. But back then, the common thing was just eating Rice Krispie bars every day and those tiny flat cookies that you have in the States that you get into a microwave. How did you call it? Pop Tarts. Yeah, Pop Tarts
oh
and stuff like that. Yeah, I was watching the uh, 3D and Muscle Journey. Those guys, those natural guys,
yeah.
and those are talking about those if you feed your macros and eating like that. So that was my first like introduced into a diet. So I eat basically
Oh,
chocolate and cottage cheese. That was all.
I never had that because like my exposure was still like you got to eat clean, right? So it was all like brown rice and chicken, but plain. It was so hard just to eat and get down. So I was like early college, I had a layout of a diet that, so I was getting around guys that lifted that they gave me, but I was just eating like the clean foods, but never off plan. Like whatever was there was exactly what I ate. So I ate like a bodybuilder back then when I powerlifted, but there was no junk in there. I thought like that would just completely diminish my progress. So I never had that phase of like the dirty bulk with like all these treats in there.
Yeah. So do you remember your first like proper training setup?
I do. That same guy that introduced me to bodybuilding, he was a good resource, evidently. Need to thank him and go find him. But it wasn't until eighth grade. So I was 14. He came out to my house and he's like, "All right, here's your training plan." It's funny because he brought with him another magazine. I think it was a Flex magazine, and it had Lee Priest on it and his old ex-wife. I forget her name. It's like Love Fun. I don't
Oh,
know.
I
Forgot.
don't really know.
Yeah, she competed, but anyway, like the first thing he brought up, he's like, "Everyone on this magazine's on steroids." My dad's eyes went like this big, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's telling him this. He's like, you won't look like this unless you're using steroids. So he's like immediately setting like my expectations
Oh
of
my
what was going to
God.
happen. So I'm like, well, okay. I just love lifting, so I mean, it didn't matter. But he set me up with full body training, 3 days per week, which I'm like, man, looking back, is like this is perfect. Like this guy was so,
Yeah.
and it would work from like I would do a squat and then there was a leg curl, and then I would do pull-ups. I had a pull-up bar. I had a bench press and like a bent over row. There was a military press. I think I had like a skull crusher for like triceps, and then I pretty much just had a barbell, so it had a barbell curl, and I think that was pretty much the gist of the program. And he was just like, do this 3 days a week, and he gave me like amount of sets and reps to do. So that's what I did. Um, and stuck to that till eventually I got in high school. And then the football coaches, I was just following their program.
Do you do a deadlift back then?
There wasn't a deadlift in there, and I kind of wonder if it was. I just had a concrete floor in my dad's shed,
Yeah.
and so I don't know if he's like, "Hey, don't let him deadlift" or what. But yeah, there wasn't a deadlift on the plan. Just like a bent over barbell row.
Yeah,
But
either way, that was a perfect setup for a beginner.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's
he made
crazy.
it as good as it could be with just a bench and
Yeah.
barbell.
You
So
were lucky, lucky as
no,
hell.
no, I look back, I didn't realize how lucky I was.
Yeah. So, uh, do you do any like a mobility or deep tissue work or any of that, or do you not even thinking about it just because you were too focused on getting as big as you possibly can?
No, none at all. Like, and I think I just already what like I hadn't got to a point where I was so immobile. Like I'd always been athletics and training through large ranges of motion and doing all types of um if you want to call them like functional movements. So I don't think there was any limitations to like being able to train and just when you're young, man, you can just jump straight in and train. So like injuries and things like that, like it just wasn't a thing that back then.
Yeah, I'm asking just because I've started to wonder if some guys starting with like a proper technique, proper training setup, and then added up with mobility and deep tissue work since the day one, if they will be like last for longer in the sport, if that's a really a reason why we are so beat up, being like a 30 years old, for example, and everything is like a probably you should I should change every joint in my replace every joint in my body, and it will be probably for the better. Especially watching how the hips of the Roman actually Fritz is right now, because he's basically t telling everyone that this is like a performance enhancing for him. So
Yeah,
so
no, for
maybe it's
him,
worth it.
it was. Yeah, I think a lot of the issues probably come up when you just get introduced to lifting poorly, and then over time, all the problems start happening. So if you start off, I think, with like good proper training, probably would last a lot longer, not run into all the bottlenecks that end up happening. Because once I got into powerlifting, that's when a lot of the issues start happening. It was just so um, lacking a lot of the things that need to be in place to like keep mobility and strength at different ranges. Just like our movement selection was very narrow. So you're probably right. Like I think just having the right exercise programming would do a lot for like even prevention.
Yeah, definitely. And going properly deep with an
Yeah.
exercise, not bumping up your ego. Yeah. So when was the first time you were introduced into a PEDs? Because you're talking about going through this like a setup into a high school. So you are actually pretty long in a training right now. So probably 6 years or even more.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely don't count it as like quality years because you lift, you've been
Yeah,
your,
but I'm
you know,
actually, yeah, but I hate the idea. Like you speak with a guy who is actually a pro right now, and he asked him, "How long you training?" And he was about 2 years right now. 2 years? Yeah,
yeah,
because the first 25 years I didn't count because that was just having fun with. Yeah, it doesn't count.
yeah. No, I definitely have been training for like over 20 years. If you, yeah, for sure. But yeah, that would be like probably 6 years in of training from 12 to 18. You know,
Yeah,
I definitely was more serious in high school, and that's when I got into competing in powerlifting. So that was my sophomore year in high school. I was right at 16. I met a guys at a local gym that powerlifted, and what stood out genetically, you brought it up, is that I was stronger than everyone in high school. Like I was only like 130 pounds, but my bench was bigger than like the linemen and anything. So I was very strong. And then I found powerlifting. I'm like, this is perfect. Like I love lifting. I don't care about the sport. So I linked up with these guys that were like 40 years old and they were competing in natural powerlifting. However, this was the era of like late 90s, early 2000s where like designer steroids were in the supplement market.
yeah,
So this was all like the androstenediones. Some of the products back then were like Biotest had like Mag 10. Um, but there were like pro hormones, but then there were also like just straight up like steroids in the market, which were in this weird gray area, right? So
yeah,
these guys were taking those. So that was kind of like an introduction even around it, where they're not doing anything illegal. They were getting it from supplement stores, but it's not necessarily natural. Um, but I was still like, I knew that I wasn't supposed to be taking this yet because my buddy that set me up was like, train natural right now. Like, wait, he's like, if you ever want to take something, just come talk to me first. Of course, that didn't happen when it, I didn't talk to him. But anyway, that was some of the introduction to it. I think it was till like maybe early 20s is when I tried some of these like supplements that were probably steroids. I think some of them were like Halodrol and Superdrol. Like these were like oral steroids,
yeah,
but I didn't know this at the time. Like I didn't. There wasn't an understanding of like that. It was explained like, no, this converts to this other hormone in the body that kind of boosts you up, so it's not a steroid. Naive, but
yeah.
that's what it was. So I had some like usage of these. Um, just until I was like kind of burnt out powerlifting. And that's when I was around like 25. I was like, I really want to bodybuild. I was when you powerlift, the people would be like, oh, are you like in the 181 class? I was like, no, I weighed 220 pounds. So I didn't look as big. So I was like, I want to look big too. I don't care about being strong. So that's when I started transitioning to bodybuilding. And also when I was looking at lab work and stuff, I was like, well, I want to test my labs because see what my testosterone level is. And it was low. It was like around 300 nanogram per deciliter. And I didn't understand. And so I kept trying to bodybuild and I was just getting like fat and not getting muscular. And I think Dawid, like probably the supplement stuff that I took
Yeah, probably.
really hurt my natural levels. And this was around 25. And so that's when I started like TRT and I got like onto a wellness clinic and started that aspect. And so my that's kind of where like that first introduction happened, at least for me.
Yeah, but by tier T you mean what dose? Because I know guys who are on tier T and using like a half gram of test and they
Oh, this was from a clinic, but it definitely wasn't aggressive. It was like it was 200 milligram per week, which
okay.
for me put me, I think, into the like close to 1,000 nanogram per deciliter. So maybe high into normal, but I was going to bodybuild, so that's when I like was getting around the crowd that had actual like steroids around. So I was going to like supplement more in, and I ran that TRT like the whole off season, and then into like my first prep, I added in a little bit more testosterone, but not by much. I think it was around 100 extra 100 milligram, and then the last like 4 weeks of the show, I still had. I think at the time it was uh Halidrol, which it's probably the closest thing is probably like Turinabol. It's like a 17 chloro type molecule. So I put that in because I remember the past, like I had this pretty decent response to like feel like I was fuller from it. And so that was kind of like my prep cycle that I did for my first show. It was like around 300 mgs of test, and then the last couple weeks there was like an oral steroid in place.
Did
And
you
I
use
was
any AIs with that?
no, actually, yeah, I think the clinic had me on already on some.
Okay.
I don't I don't recall what exactly the dosage was though. It might have been like I think I was doing it the day after a shot, and so it might have been half a milligram twice a week, something like that, of a like a Arimidex.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So that
I
was
didn't
the
have that first like big cycle of like what do you do? But
yeah.
I will say that off season is where it kind of happened. And you read in the forums at this time was like you do 500 milligrams of test, and that's what you do for your first cycle, and you do it for 12 weeks for some reason, and then you have to stop. So that was kind of like where my first dosages were at. Yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing with that cycles was like you doing a 12 weeks and then you stop for 4. Obviously, you're doing like a long esters, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you about your early days when it comes to the getting your like a bulk of your mass because probably you're training about 8 years to this point. So probably like a 6 of those were really shitty, but you gained something with that. So when was the time that you really blow up? Because probably the first cycle of the 500 test was the time you really blow up. But I wanted to confirm that.
It was okay, honestly. I think the extra gear I had was not that great quality because it didn't do a lot. And I was like, gosh, that was not impressive. Then the next time I got it from a different source, and that's when I like really had a bigger response. But I think I went up like 20 pounds. So, whatever, 9 kilos, something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of it came off quick too. So there was like some water. Um, that was probably about a 12, 14 week run. I wouldn't say it was like the best gains I've ever had in my life. I think it still wasn't until I was bodybuilding with a coach that I got the largest growth spurt. Because throughout this time, those first 3 years of bodybuilding, I was just doing my own coaching, using gear, kind of raising the dosages up as I went. A lot of it was like tests and Nandrolone combinations. I think that was probably some of the main stuff I used. I used Trin the first time in, I think that was my third show to prep with. The other shows were all just like tests, and man, it's hard to think back. This was a long time ago.
Yeah. I'm shocked that you even remember this much.
Yeah, maybe there was. I'd be making it up if I said it, but I'm sure there. I think there was Masteron in there too because that was a normal thing, right?
Yeah, of course.
But the dosages all around that time, those first 3 years of myself, I don't think I ever really went over a gram. If not, it was a little bit more because I would add like, remember I was like 500, 750 tests. Then some Nandrolone was coming in there from like 300, maybe to 500 max. I think that was the majority of my off-season cycles I would do. But I don't think I ever got like my stage weight was around like 192 for that last show I did by myself. And 3 years ago, I was around like 179. So like for that time period, like I don't think I was making great progress. It wasn't until like I qualified for nationals. I'm like, I need a coach. That's when I hired Matt. That's where I made a lot of progress.
Okay, so let's talk about it because that was the next part of the podcast, the working with Matt, because a lot of guys were actually curious at the forum about the whole approach of Matt and like how much everything's changed basically because before you were working just with yourself having like a little to no knowledge about it because every knowledge you gain is basically was just your thoughts about certain topics that you're happy to try and that was all probably and some
Yeah, it's
maybe
like the
some
local
yeah.
guys, right? The drug dealer would be like, you should do this. Like, okay.
Yeah, of course, and it's always like a six compounds and stuff like that because he's your drug dealer. So six is better than one, yeah. So you get with the math and you get your first like a plan and you read it and what was your thoughts about
It was holy crap. Like this is a lot. And I hired Matt when I think I was about 13 weeks out from nationals. That's when I was prepping and I was like, I need someone better to do this. And so found Matt. He wasn't a bigger name at the time. I think this is when he was coaching Justin Compton. He just had a really small group of guys he was coaching. And so he was like, I'm not comfortable with the timeline because I had a lot of body fat to pull off. So the whole prep for me was constant smashing to get fat down. I had one meal that he told me to have off plan the whole time. The rest was every day was just a deficit. So the whole thing about refeeds and all this, like that wasn't a thing. It was just constant grinding to get fat off. Um, I can't remember every aspect of the like PD design. I hadn't used growth hormone at this point. That wasn't a thing. I also couldn't afford it or get it, find it.
it?
And
Yeah.
so this was just going to be testosterone, which I just can't remember the exact dosages that were there. I will tell you what I do remember is that I was using 500 milligram per week of tren at one point, and I had this like nodule behind my nipple, and I could squeeze my nipple, and this little bit of fluid would come out. Totally freaked me out, right? I've never had side effects or anything before. I'm like, Matt, like I think I'm getting gyno, like I'm lactating, like what was happening? He's like, okay, let's add in Caber, and then let's lower your trend down. He like reduced it in half. Absolutely for sure was on Masteron and test. And Matt likes quite a bit of test. And then usually there was an AI already there, which I'm thinking I was like a milligram of Remedex every day. I do kind of recall that. Well, that was the guts of it. So I'm sure with Trent at 500, I'm sure test and everything else was over a gram. So it's definitely the most gear I've ever run. And pretty much, I mean, I that was my prep. So just to get down lean enough. But man, I was peeled. That was like when I finally got true stage lean, and I ended up being like 184 ready. But Matt was like, we should make middleweights. He's like, you'll have a shot. I'm like, oh, I'll do anything. So pulled down to 176 to make weight. And I ended up getting sixth at USA's that year. But it was after was when I had like the big growth spurt because more gear than I've ever run in my life, plus now food's coming in. I've never been stage lean. So my runway to grow was like tremendous, right? And that's also the first time I started bringing in some growth hormone too. And this was like UG growth hormone. Like I wasn't, who knows what I had.
Yeah.
But it was just a small amount. And I think post show we kept trenin, but it was lowered like 200 milligram. And then test and EQ. The dosage I can't remember. I would be lying if I would just make it up. But through that, like I went up to like 220 in 8 weeks, and I was a machine, man. Like I wanted my diet the next day after the show. Like no cheating. Like what do I need to do to grow? Right. So I didn't have a bunch of fat gain post show and blow up. Like so this whole time was like solid growth. Like I grew like crazy. And I would worry, like the end of the week, I'd be up like 4 pounds or something. Like, Matt, like I gained 4 pounds this week. Like he's like, look, your glute lines are still in. I was like, well, okay, I just follow what you tell me. So yeah, by the end, I was 220 and I looked like a different human being. Um, Way better than I've ever looked at 220 before. And that was after 8 weeks, that's when we pulled gear back down to like cruise for a bit and then bring it back up. So that was probably a lot of information, but
Yeah, some some guys are still thinking that you were gaining the most and getting the biggest progress with the mat, but you cannot do with a setup like that because if you were for the first time seriously lean, and then you introduce probably a proper dose of drugs compared to the previous
I was
ones,
just completely
yeah,
leveled up. Like we
GH
probably
and everything, yeah.
doubled the
The,
drugs. Like,
So
um,
it's really this whole question supposedly make us like compare the approach you're doing right now with the approach back then because there's quite a lot of difference because we everyone knows that Matt loves high protein and like a high tests and stuff like that, and you are like I don't want to say opposite because you are not opposite, but a little
sure.
bit different in terms of that because Matt, for example, are not counting every macros. He is, but he's just adding a little bit extra. So it's not like 300 grams of protein from the whole source. It's from the meat. So it's gonna be probably like a 400 or 450 if you are eating a lot of carbs. So it's that's pretty much the difference. But we just can't really make any compare because this just whole just there's even another period in your life, so it's
So
really
hard to compare
yeah.
to, because we I worked with Matt for 3 years. So don't get me wrong, we tried to replicate that for sure. It was never the same. Like post show, like gear would be it as a total milligram amount, it was coming down, right? Or there were Matt liked using like all the orals, right? So I had everything in place, like Anavar, Halo, Winstrol, Proviron, like all of it. So all those would come out. So I think the total milligram amount was coming down post show, but we would try to do what we did from 15 to 16, and that response was just not the same. I think probably because it was such a drastic difference. For one, I was younger and didn't have those gains yet, so I'm not as advanced. But also, I think the amount of drugs that of increase, like a percentage increase, was drastic versus the dosages weren't that different, I think, the next times that we tried to do it. So what I would say looking back though is at the end of these phases, like you push so hard in the post show period that the rest of the offseason wasn't that productive. Did you make a lot of progress like in this first phase? Then gear comes way down. You've been pushing food real high. So now you're already getting kind of softer. So this next phase, like low food and you're already a little softer, you just maintain the best you can. and then gear comes back up and you already don't have a lot of progress to continue to make in the off season. So like the rest of that off season from 15 to 16, I didn't make a lot of progress really until I was kind of back in prep. So that was like kind of the takeaway from those periods. Like, is there a way to like kind of linearly continue to make progress? Like, Matt, get the most post show, but then once you're at post show, continue to move, right? And I think that's where kind of some of the approach had changed with like having enough in place post show and really letting like nutrition and training like drive that. And then once that's slowing down, well, then we keep moving the drugs up to keep you moving. I think the thing is, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to that because do you think that the first approach isn't actually a tiny bit better because you're probably gonna gain a little bit more at the beginning and quite a less at the end, but it's like kind of a period that you have this muscle for a longer time. So it's probably less chance that you're gonna get rid of during the contest prep, for example. Because if you're doing it like this, and now you start with your contest prep, you just basically go like this. But if you're doing it like this, and you just go steady for a 6, 8, 12 weeks, and then just slowly get down, you're probably gonna end up with a little bit more tissue. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's the concept around cementing the gains, right? Like you need to hold a body weight or tissue level.
You're not believing in that?
I don't really believe in it. I've stated these things before around like you probably need to hold tissue for a bit. Um, but I don't believe in it. I guess you have to look at the time frame of like, is it you'd lose the gains from 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago? Like what makes it to where it would drop off so quickly? I think a lot of that too is if you have it very rapid, you're going from these rapid moments. I think that might give you a more of an ability to drop off that tissue, just because you think about how fast the gains come and strength gains come. You come to this high really quick, then you move to a very low level of hormones versus a very steady climb, which we know hypertrophy happens at a very slow rate. I think you can blur your assessment quickly because post show you hold a lot of water, right? And so I think it's easy to blur like this fullness you gain
Yeah.
with fat gain versus muscle gain. To where when that fullness dissipates, you're like, oh shit, like that actually was a lot of fat gain. And then the gains you made were actually the ones that kind of fall off quick because there was a lot of water. Now, I do think, though, Dawid, to your point, is that there should be some phase at the end of this period to drop off fatigue and bring to maintenance. If you want to say that's solidifying it, I think it's more so making sure that you're managing all your other variables right. And one thing Matt would really point out, like when we did have gear come down, he's like, and what he said I was successful with is that my mentality didn't change in training.
Yeah.
So I think people's mentality change where gear's low and they don't put the same into training and then muscle drops off, or they go on prep and they haven't established the training piece strong enough to where they just can't hold the tissue in prep. So I think that's the key there is like you need to be able to transition like from low gear to high gear and still have like quality training to uphold tissue. So there still needs to be some phase in there. And just so you have a phase right with low gear and you're not all year long high, but to be able to have training really uphold that tissue. And that should be like the root thing that establishes that over like just staying arbitrarily at a body weight. I think it should be more training based.
Yeah. Now, when I rethink this, you actually have a point here because the real tissue is actually the myofibril
Sure. Yeah.
growth. So even though we are doing we're just getting a little bit swole by the getting a more fullness with the muscle with those
Yeah. Just all the
yeah,
glycogen and
all the glycogen,
aldosterone and the water slowing,
yeah, of
right?
course,
Yeah.
probably a lot
Fun.
of it is just fullness. Yeah, you have a point here. So the whole holding phase is actually it's hard to even explain it in a biological way because
There's
yeah,
some
it's
like early studies that kind of show this, like where studies where they have sarcoplasmic growth and then myofibril. Some of this was in blood flow restriction training, where this whole idea of cementing gains came from, and that some of this might be a transition period where there's like sarcoplasmic expansion to prepare to increase myofibril protein content. And so it's like, what's this process look like? But the research is really early. This is where it came out like, oh, now there's sarcoplasmic hypertrophy training and myofibril. It's like, no, it's like all mixed together. Don't overcomplicate it. But is there this period where growth could continue to happen after a training bout? And that's in blood flow restriction training where they absolutely smash these guys, like untrained subjects, restrict them. They're so sore that they didn't recover till like 10 days after these training sessions. So the growth did happen after they stopped training, but it was because they just like didn't have the capability to recover yet. But that's like all the research that's there for like kind of like delayed growth and cemented gains. But I think this period means like you should have a time after you're pushing to like hold and drop fatigue off before you jump right back into a diet, because you might have too much fatigue still present and not recover. But I think the way we do things, it's not reflective in these studies. Like we're not training for 2 weeks, absolutely annihilating ourselves with blood flow restriction. It's more of this gradual thing. And hey, you take a couple days off and you're probably pretty good to keep on
Yeah,
going. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
and
that's like stuff that's from like the natty evidence-based side, right? Trying to come in. But in application, guys don't do that. I don't see like big progress drop off into prep for a lot of people. I think it's the guys that train real shitty that it does for.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah. And I see a lot of drop-offs just because people just get into their heads too much. Like a deficit
They're full of water.
is a world is a word that killing all the gains.
These
It's
guys
just
are
a
running
word,
like
but
just running like cycles that are just a ton of water. I've had guys that are like 20 pounds of water with Slin and growth hormone. They're
yeah,
like think it's all muscle and that drops off. They're like, man, I lost my muscle. In prep. It's like, no, man, you're just a bunch of water.
yeah, yeah, mostly. You're gonna see it probably at my example because
Oh
just
no.
I just get off the IGF-1 3 and a lot of insulin and stuff like that. So yeah, but I just wanted to clarify one thing that we are talking about a mat approach, but this is mat approach back then, so it's probably changed a lot. So we're not gonna
Could be, yeah.
create an illusion that Matt is a guy who is just prescribing a lot of drugs or something like that. We just want to clear the air here. We are not gonna bashing Matt at
No, no,
any
no.
point. We just
I
talk about the previous time.
Yeah, to Matt's credit, absolutely. Like that was some of the best coaching time like I've ever had, and we made a ton of progress. And I think Matt is always about the show outcome and using a optimal, appropriate amount of drug to drive the process. Um, and that's what we were doing. So I signed up to go pro and go to the Olympia. Matt was doing what he thought was best to take me there, and we were making progress. So
Yeah, just want to clarify that because I know there's some guys that's gonna think that right now that Matt is just crazy about the drugs and stuff like
it was.
that.
I think it's within reasonable use. It really was. So.
Okay, so you get your pro card with Matt actually, and then you decided to do it by yourself. Actually, yes, because
Yeah, yeah,
I don't remember that you have Matt was your only coach. Yes,
yeah.
am I correct?
I worked with Shelby Starnes like a long time ago. Before I even bodybuilt, I just went through an off season with him of like growing. But anyway, Matt was the long coach that I had, and that was till I did two pro shows with Matt in the 212, and that's when I started doing my own thing for about a year. And then when I was prepping myself for the next show, Andrew Vuz is what he took over the last 4 weeks of the show from there. That was 2019.
Yeah, maybe it was something like that. I'm rewatching all of your old videos when
Uh,
I am closer to the show. I've always watched every like videos of every guy I like.
Oh, cool.
that have like a YouTube channel. So you're one of them. So I've watched
Thanks.
like your preps like 1,000 times right now. So yeah.
But I pulled up some pics from my last off season with Matt. The heaviest I've ever been. It was right before 2018. I was 260, and man, I looked like a balloon face. I think all my weight was in my head. We were using a bunch of Deca, and that's the most insulin I've used too. And dude, I was just a bunch of water, I think, then. So
How
we
tall you
went to
are?
how old was I then?
How tall you are?
Oh, 5'7".
5'7". So you are my height actually. So the heaviest you've been was 260?
That's the first time I hit 260. The heaviest I've ever
Oh,
been was like 262. So I haven't got that much over that, but it looked completely different the last time that I was at 262. So um, yeah, I was a lot leaner this past time. We went to Dominican Republic and I got some type of weird GI parasite. I lost like 20 pounds. I was gonna do the Open for the New York Pro that year with Matt, but I lost all this weight. I wanted to prep anyway, and that's why I still did 212 that
okay.
year. Um,
So if not the parasite, we
I probably would
probably
already be
have
in the Open.
yeah a bunch of Olympias right now in the
I
open
know.
class.
No, the regret. No.
Yeah. Oh, I still wasn't congratulate you about your pro win. So
Ah,
let me
thank
do it
you.
right now. Congratulate.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much. That's I
that was
couldn't
a
be
hell of a
happy.
show. That was a hell of a show. Great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just to get to the Open Olympia, just to step on the stage, I'm excited to do it. So knowing that I'm not just the 212 guy, I feel like I've finally stepped outside of that label and that I can hang in the Open. So
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about the road to the open because
okay, let's
then
do it.
you just take a list on yourself and you basically coach yourself for a quite couple of shows. It was like a I don't want to
Yeah, yeah.
just make it out. It was 6 shows or something like that. Was
I mean, I've been coaching myself since 2020. Um,
whoa that long?
yeah. So
I
I've
thought you're
done
coaching yourself for about 2 years right now. That is
no
4 years. Okay,
after the
almost
2020
5 years.
Olympia, I have been doing it since then. So I did all of 21, did the Olympia in 21 as 212, took 2022 off and did an off season, and then that led into 23, where I did the my last 212 show,
Yeah.
the Atlanta Pro. I won that, and that was where 23 I did my first Open show before the Olympia, and I was going to be my gauge of like, man, maybe I'll do the Open or just to try it, and then I'll do the 212 Olympia. But I did so well that I'm like, I can't ever go back to 212 after seeing myself on stage like that. And I got second too at Legion. So I was like, I'll skip the Olympia. I'm gonna go all in to being Big John.
Okay. So let's talk about a big jump because everyone
Okay,
just rubbing their hands right now. I know what's changed going into the open, diet wise, training wise, maybe cardio wise, because I know you are for the short period of time at least a big on hits training
yeah,
and PD wise if you want to talk about it and GH insulin if you want to talk about it.
sure. So I think part of it's important to talk about like the 212 to open move and like what that prep looked like. That was a weird timeline. It was 12 weeks from that 212 show to Legion. And so for uh for the 212 preps, well, I think why people always like John's low gear, because I don't need a lot of gear to maintain to get to 212 on stage. But the off season before, I was using like 2 grams per week of gear. And that made some good progress to where I was basically I don't think I could get any bigger to be able to make weight and still look good on stage. So, but the end of that prep to make weight, I still have to like get really low test. I don't use a lot of growth hormone, but I have to completely remove it to make weight. So post show, why is this important? Because post show, I'm like, well, I've never moved growth hormone up quite a bit. And I had 3 weeks of like lower gear. just to drop off some fatigue, stay healthy or whatever. Then the last 9 weeks is when I went back to what I was doing cycle wise. The anabolics weren't that different, but I really raised growth hormone up. And I was going from, like, again, none to three IUs, then a five IUs, then a seven IUs. And this was, by that point, I think I was like 5 weeks out. And man, I was just changing crazy, fuller, rounder, just as lean. Growth hormone was doing a lot for me. As far as diet goes in that phase, honestly, nothing was too different because I still haven't really drastically changed like protein. So I was still around like a little over 300 grams of protein total. Carbs had come up. That was the main thing. I was probably around 500 grams of carbs during that time. But the big changer for me was really growth hormone. I didn't realize how much that would do for me because I've never been able to really push that being in this 212 area. So I think I have it pulled up exactly what I was doing during that time period was yeah, it was so I didn't raise test up a lot because of the time and period
Yeah.
between, but it was 300 test, 1400 masteron, 200 trin, and then 7 IUs of growth hormone. And that's what I rode all the way to Legion. I was on stage at the 212 show at 214. At Legion, I was 222. So came up like a good amount of body weight. Probably a lot of that was just like fullness and roundness
Fullness,
from
yeah.
growth hormone. And a thing for me is like I'm the guy that gets real conditioned. So I left growth hormone the whole time. All the way like one day out from the show, I'm still taking growth hormone. Because if I lowered it, dropped it, I would see like just the look would be less impressive. And also like the amount of like composition change, like from fat, is pretty substantial with it too. And I realized this even for my last show, Toronto, I'll jump ahead but come back, is that I started lowering test and growth hormone a lot after Toronto to Vancouver. And man, I was just like, I'm not getting as lean. Like my body weight's lower too. And that's when I was like, I had to ask my friend Luke, like, man, what's going on? Like I look at this. He's like, dude, you respond to growth hormone and keeping test higher. So that's when I cranked growth hormone back up. And it's the same thing, like getting leaner, rounder. So from Legion, like that was a big game changer going to that show with like growth hormone was a big difference. Honestly, the training and nutrition was stuff that I've always done, and that really didn't really change. So so post Legion, I was like, well, I'm gonna skip the Olympia and take a real off season, which it was a short off season now, and I had like 7 weeks to kind of like bring the dosages down, 16 weeks to run a cycle, and then would only give me enough time to just jump right back into a prep if I wanted to compete the next year. So that's what I did. And I can go ahead and jump into what the off season looked like if you want me to.
Yeah, of course. Please do.
Um, so for this off season, like a few things that I'll say were like really successful were, for one, the value of being able to stay extremely lean post show. That just gave me, I did it better than what I've done, I think, any year before. And like, even before I started prep, I still had my like glutes in. And this was the fact of like still gaining over like 1 pound per week. So I'm not like I'm just trying to stay lean. Like the rate of gain is good. Gym numbers are flying up. It's just I'm able to stay leaner because I really managed my nutrition of like pretty much being on prep. So there wasn't like little extra things coming in, especially like the untracked meals were still tracked. Like I would go to the sushi restaurant I know, I get the exact same tooth rolls every week. But I think that's where in the past I kind of would eat too much and I gained most of my weight from that meal,
Yeah.
and not during the week. So like the regiment was like my wife goes crazy because I'm basically have been on prep for like 2 years is what it feels like. But that regiment for me, man, is like substantial progress to stay really, really lean. Then I think also is when post show I started implementing in like hit cardio, and I am not, things that I'm bad about is cardio in the off season, and it usually just starts to not happen. And so I was like, how can I make this happen? And the psychology for me, I love hit. Like I can put in effort for a minute hard, and that's what I would do. So I would do 4 to 5 sets of hit, and I would alternate between the spin bike and like battle ropes. So I was never like locally taxing one area a lot, and I would just do it post training. It would take me like less than 10 minutes, and my lab work looked better for it. I kept really good work capacity, so like I wouldn't get gassed doing my leg days because I stayed cardiovascularly fit. I think there's some good like metabolic aspects, like for when you get back into prep, you're still able to like really burn body fat well. But anyway, I think the two bottlenecks for an off season is people like health and just like getting less fit and gaining body fat. So this worked really well. The growth hormone added a substantial benefit because I've never kept it high in the off season. I feel like if you're running growth hormone high in the off season, you don't really have a good reason to get super fat unless you're just not doing the other things that you should be as a bodybuilder. So I was stayed around 9 IUs for most of the off season, and that was like the first time I ran that much. It was a good difference. Going higher is when I noticed just more water retention and not really any extra benefit. And I think there's a point to like blurring your visuals and assessment from too much growth hormone to know if you're gaining fat or not. And then also just getting gas from being heavier. Like you don't need to have that piece or your health markers. But as far as cycle goes, I believe in raising the dosage up across time to see the same type of progress, right? So you can't just, I think eventually if you kept running 2 grams your whole career, that 2 grams every time you ran it, it's not going to give you as much progress, right? So there should be a rate of increase. So I went up to pretty close to 3 grams per week over this 16-week phase. And you'll find it interesting. So I worked my way up to 1,000 tests, and it was under 2,000 master run, but we could round it. And that was for right into the 12, like, well, was that 11 weeks in? And man, I was making tremendous progress. So master run was a big piece of that. But I came across some really quality primo during this time. And that's why I don't use primo a lot because of just access and also tolerance. But I came across some. So I was like, all right, I'm handling 1,000 tests, and this was without an AI. So I was like, screw it. People say test is going to grow you more or whatever. Primo's better than mast. Let me switch the cycle up. I took test up to 1,400, and I cut masteron in half, and I added the rest in as primo. The total milligram amount stayed the same.
Mhm.
It was just the same type of progress. Like I didn't all of a sudden explode or anything with more growth. Um, and what I would say though is that my skin quality seemed better than when I was running that much Masteron. I would notice my hands were like starting to peel. So that's just the only thing. But as far as like any other side effect goes, the only thing to mention was like my sleep quality seemed to drop off when tests got that high. And I think probably it was because my estradiol was probably higher than what it needed to be. So I felt better with test around 1,000. Sleep was better. However, I think the combo of Mass Primo was probably better, at least probably for like skin quality and probably not as androgenic of a aspect. But again, like lab work still all looked really good for me. The issue with not going all primo is because I just can't tolerate it, like the shot volume. So the combo is like if I have primo, I'm running primo 100%. I think it's a more refined masteron, but just trying to at this point manage shot volume is what it comes down to when you're shooting every day. So that I made great progress just in 16 weeks. Like I was 252 and I still had glute lines in. So I was very lean. And that kind of led me into prep, right? Which I end up being about 230 at Toronto. So a year, 214 on stage, now to 230 on stage. I feel like it's like a pretty good rate of progress for um, my level
Yeah,
of
for
that
a
I've been
pro.
in my low protein intake because and let me just not talk about drugs because I talked about the managing the surplus was really important. Other things in the past that were problems were injuries, would really hold me back. And so some things that changed training wise was trying to program to where I would limit my loading and these compound movements. So it's the kind of times where I kept in like for quads, like always a leg extension first, like 3 sets, like all out to where I could never use as much weight when I went to my squat patterns. On push days, chest, like always a fly has been first, then into my pressing. And man, I haven't had usually it was pec injuries and quad injuries. And I haven't had an injury like that since I've been doing that this whole past off season prep, everything. So to be able to create your training to sustain is extremely important. Maybe you get a bit more growth doing your big quad compound first, but if you get injured in 8 weeks, it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that programming made a vast difference. I feel like I'm still making really good progress post show right now, and I've really the feedback was like I need more quad sweep and chest still. So I'm now training legs twice a week. So volume has come up, but it's still programmed in a way that's not beating me up to where I might run into these injury issues. But anyway, those were some of the big changes I would say that led to a lot of progress. Um, Threw a lot at you, Dawid. So please ask any
Yeah.
questions. There wasn't
Yeah.
much in there. Like insulin kind of came in and out, but I didn't really utilize it much.
Yeah,
So
I wanted to ask you about it, but yeah, right now. Okay, so I know you have to go, and actually, I have to go as well, just because I'm gonna babysit the kids of my sister. But
okay,
yeah, but wanted to ask you quick questions, but only few because you are answer most of them. For example,
okay.
there was
I'll
a
try to like
question
be.
about
I'll try to be quick fire.
yeah, like there was a question about the primo versus like a masteron, but you clarified it pretty well, so it's irrelevant right now. So, what about the using of lantus in bodybuilding, in your opinion? Is that something that is worth to utilize, and if so, how?
Yeah, I've changed some views around that at least. Like I used to like manage, watch your blood glucose if it rises up, bring insulin in, and that's when you would do it. But I feel like with using that much growth hormone, like man, it's so inaccurate to measure your blood glucose. Like it's going to be high,
Yeah,
but what matters is really what is the average across the day and what is your serum insulin level doing. And what I started doing is I just look at my A1C, and across that whole off season I had, my A1C actually went down with food going higher, growth hormone high. So I think the idea around insulin resistance and growth hormone, if you're doing all the things you need should be doing, not eating a bunch of shit, doing cardio, not gaining fat too quick, like you won't need insulin to manage blood glucose. Not for everyone, but I don't think that's the way to use it in bodybuilding. I think that's the way to use it if you're like diabetic.
yeah,
Now, what I would say is with growth hormone at super physiological amounts, you are challenging insulin production to a very high degree. So I think using it to more offset your own body's having to produce so much. So what I'd say now is that if you're using super physiological amounts of growth hormone, you're in a surplus, you're gaining weight, is when I would have a just a small like replacement amount of Lantus present just to offset some of the extra production. So I would put Lantus in for that person in that situation, just kind of off the bat in their push phase, especially if we see in their lab markers that those numbers creep up like every 10 to 12 weeks we're seeing it, then you'll kind of know off coaching. I'm like, all right, we'll put Lantus in, but I wouldn't go over like 20 to 30 IUs per day because then we're getting to a point where we're trying to manage blood glucose, which you're already managing blood glucose, you're probably already pretty insulin resistant, which is already going to be less productive for like progress and health. So that's how I see Lantus use. And then around that too could be Humalog as well, just like in a large, you have one meal that's really large just to help offset your own production a bit. But as far as like more growth from insulin and things like, I have still not seen that pan out to be a big game changer at all. I think it gives an altered perception of like pump and how you feel in the gym. Maybe that's enough, but I don't see it contributing like to a greater. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I get your point, but you say 20 to 30 IUs a day, so you mean daily? or for
Yeah.
example, 1 to 2 times a week?
I would do daily for Lantis, or depending on the diet setup, right? Like if you're doing like high carb days, maybe it's just
Yeah.
those days, or if it's just on training days, something like this. Should be based on your on body weight, but just to give you some rough numbers. But these guys are usually big that need to be doing it. Like if you're under 200 pounds, this is likely not what you need to be doing. So
Yeah, got a one question that is actually a pretty good, I think. What's your biggest regret or the most stupid thing you've done in your bodybuilding journey?
well, there's a few. Probably it's
Choose
not
the
as
biggest one.
yeah. Well, definitely like not hiring a coach earlier on. Also, not moving to the open earlier on. As far as like really stupid things, I have to be, I haven't done anything like terribly stupid. Like I've always been pretty like risk aware to not really go out and do some wild things. Um, yeah, I don't think I've done anything like so carelessly. I'd say, oh man, I was totally stupid and did this. I've like stacked diuretics for shows, but it wasn't a terrible outcome either. So,
Yeah,
um,
me too.
yeah, I mean, I haven't done anything that was like way out there, I would say.
Yeah, that's just bummer. I thought you're gonna tell us a pretty crazy or scary story that's gonna just blow us.
Yeah, no, I feel like, man, yeah, I wish I had one. I just
Not
there's
not
nothing.
even a close to being dead or something like that.
Okay, okay. I went to the hospital. I went to the hospital in off season one time. This was actually the year that I got to my heaviest with Matt. And this isn't
Matt
like
Folds, yeah.
it's not Matt's fault. Well, it's Matt's fault. No, Renee and I were watching a movie. It was The Green Room, which is intense, right? But my heart started racing and I started feeling like this tightness. Then I got really paranoid. And so I was like, Renee, I think we should go to the ER. And so I was like, this is it. Like I'm having a heart attack. Like I'm young. Like this is all from bodybuilding. So I go, they hook me all up. They run all my labs, my enzymes and things. They're like, you're not having a heart attack. Your blood pressure's okay. They're like, I think I just had an anxiety attack from watching a scary movie.
Oh my
So
God.
now that was like the scariest moment, I think, when I thought like, man, I'm finally like having a heart attack from bodybuilding, but it wasn't. It was probably more like an anxiety attack, which is kind of embarrassing. But I don't know, man. I mean, that trend story was like probably the one of the not scary, but a weird side effect to happen, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think post show, this is personal side, like, and was actually more of a scary one too. I'll tell you, if you run gear, you're gonna have a side effect at some point in your life, but
Yeah, of course.
after a very long prep in 16. So with Matt, right, we did USA's. I did my pro debut like 8 weeks later. Man, for like 4 months after that show, like I had the worst ED ever. Like I thought like I was done for, and it wasn't coming back. I'm like, and this is when I met Renee too. So I'm like, this is a huge problem. And finally it did. Like it just took time. And maybe it was from just running like that much training for so long and being on a diet for so long. You had to pay it back, like
Yeah.
whatever you're doing on prep, it's like borrowing money from the bank. Like you're gonna have to pay it back. So it just took a long time to recover. But man, I remember during that 4 months, like I was pretty frantic because I thought like I did some permanent damage here. So that was a pretty scary moment. That's a personal one. So I really put myself out there sharing
Yeah.
it. But
I really appreciate that.
if you bodybuild, you're like, oh yeah, man, we all deal with this stuff and we have our scares. But
Yeah.
luckily, I haven't had anything too dramatic that I've gone through. So
Yeah, when it comes to those scary and funny moments in the PED's user lifestyle, like a journey,
yeah,
is that most of the side effects is actually not from the PEDs, but they are just we just assume that because I have a lot of guys who are, I don't know, can't sleep or just their sex drives is very low and stuff like that. And they never assume that it might be from working 12 hours a day and then going to the training and then being on deficit and using like a 1.5 grams of coffee in a day and stuff like that. They
Yeah.
never like connected the dots. Never. That's all. Yeah, I think that the trend is fucked me up. The 140 milligrams of trend a week is just fucking me up, man. So it's always like that. So
It's funny you
hopefully,
say that
yeah,
because when I think back, like, man, I was working in these long hospital shifts and then prep, like I was bodybuilding, and then it probably was like I just wasn't sleeping, and my stress load was high. That is
yeah,
one thing I'm so better about now. Like I reduced my work so much the past 2 years to where, man, I have a really low stress life. I think it made a big difference too in
yeah.
the progress I made. My preps are easy now. Like I don't have hard preps.
Man, since I have a CPAP machine, my prep is easy as well. Because
Hmm.
for the first time in my life, I'm actually sleeping during the contest preps. Previously, like 8 weeks out, I can forget about sleeping properly. And I think this because I have a very poor sleep quality during the whole of season. But I just not even thinking about it because you're so driven to get the gains and you just yeah, I'm feeling tired because I'm eating a lot and stuff like that. The insulin is high all day from the eating and stuff like that. This is why I fall asleep basically everywhere. It's not like a sleep apnea, not at
It's the
all.
growth hormone. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
and
lethargic,
then you
right?
add the trend, so you're obviously not sleeping because it's the trend involved. So that's pretty normal. So I just like I eat like a bunch of like magnesium and stuff like that, or even like a lighter sleeps medicine, but nothing crazy, but like a herbs ones and stuff like that, just to try to manage it. But uh, not even thinking about doing like a checking when it comes to the sleep apnea
Basics.
or yeah basics like or
Yeah.
even a manage of stress or the work or anything like that. Just getting to the workout, beating myself to the death, and then just wondering why I can't sleep. Yeah, so that was always the case with me.
You probably have your best off season and prep ever just from
Yeah,
sleeping.
definitely, yeah. Okay, John, thank you for coming to the podcast. I know that you're actually have you told me that you have like a 60 minutes for me, and we are basically on a
I
one and
know.
a half hour right now.
Yeah, I just like last time, right? I know we didn't get to everything, so Doc, we could do this another time, and I love
Yeah,
chatting with you
I would
too.
really love to do one about your coaching because I have like a whole series with with coaches, talking about their approach with the clients, and I would really like to do one with you because I know you are actually a pretty like unique when it comes to the whole managing stress and stuff like that because most of the coaches are actually not even mention about it. So I think that that could be a really good one. So if you have the power and it's not going to be like a 1 week till the Olympia or something like that, we can definitely if you wanted to do another one.
Okay, sounds good.
Great.
Well, thanks for
So
having me. I appreciate Dawid, and best wishes on your prep until I talk to you again.
thank you. And I can't wait to see you at the Olympia stage, man. That's gonna be a
Oh yeah, just to stand next, it's the lineup is wild. Just to stand next to these guys is going to be incredible. I'm pumped for it.
yeah, it's like a fanboy mode on.
I know, right? It's really cool.
Okay, if anyone just sticks with us to the end of this podcast, just go down below, and then in the descriptions below, you're gonna find all the links to the John. And in case you are not following him yet, that's probably not possible, but whatever. And thanks for watching. If you wanted to, just please subscribe, share, comment, and do everything that's pretty basic to the YouTube algorithm. Bump it up. So, thank you.